You're listening to All Art is Quite Useless, where a group of mates chat about art. We talk about music, literature, films, paintings, and everything in between.
The podcast is also brought to you by Cavity Magazine, a magazine dedicated to bringing you the latest developments from the front lines of online writing. Find us on Twitter at Cavity Magazine and submit today.
Alternatively, you can get in touch by emailing at submissionscavmag@gmail.com. submissionscavmag@gmail.com.
All art is quite useless.
Hello once again. This is All Art is Quite Useless. This is episode 6. This week we are taking a look at Daniel Clowes' comic series Like a Velvet Glove Cast in Iron, and we'll be doing a spoiler discussion on that. There is a link in the description to this podcast as to where you can read that online for free, but I also recommend picking up a copy of the graphic novel because the artwork is excellent. It's nice to have a physical copy of such nice things. We'll be talking all things Tina, Laura, and various other fish monsters and conspiracies in this episode. So, like I said, if you don't want to be spoiled, do go ahead and read it. I've replaced the usual intro music this week with Jan Pechan Ho, which is the song from the opening credits of Ghost World. We had a little discussion about that this week too, so if you want to go ahead and watch that to have a bit more frames of reference for our conversation, do go ahead. At about 28 minutes into this podcast, Jack starts playing with a coin in his microphone, and it's a very bloody irritating noise, and I couldn't quite work out a good way with which to edit it because it was making quite a good point at the time. So I'm afraid the audience will just have to grin and bear it. So, sorry again, and he has been reprimanded, and he shall never ever do it again. But now sit back and enjoy it. Jan Hall.
जान पहचान हो जीना आसान हो जान पहचान हो जीना आसान हो दिल को चुराने वालों आंख न चुराओ नाम तो बताओ जान पहचान हो जीना आसान हो जान पहचान हो जीना आसान हो दिल को चुराने वालों आंख न चुराओ नाम तो बताओ जान पहचान हो 1 जीना आसान हो
3,
4.
You had one task, Olivia.
I can see the moment that you realised in your eyes, Olivia. You're like,
I'm number 3. There was a film called I'm Number 4, wasn't there?
Oh,
You can see that in the cinema.
I've not literally thought about that film for 8 years. That was like a weird rush of memories coming
I
back
had the
about
book,
this movie
I never read
I'd
it.
not thought about.
Unfortunately, we're not here to discuss I Am Number 4. We're here to discuss instead Daniel Clowes' 8-part saga, if you will, Like a Velvet Glove Cast in Iron. I set this last week for our reading. I read it nearly 2 years ago. As I said in that last pod, I got given it as a gift from my dear friend Liam for my 22nd birthday. And he knows my taste to a T, that man. And I really struggled to think of what we're going to look at next, considering we've done quite a good range of stuff, and I wanted to pick something unlike anything else we'd done. And I thought, what better place to go than the crazy world of Daniel Clowes' mind? I'm so intrigued as to what you all thought. it's so nuts. Yeah, I'll open it up. Jamie, open this shit up.
In a slightly anticlimactic fashion, I don't really know what to make of this. You're right, it is nuts. And I could tell that like a lot of it, particularly where it's incoherent and extremely strange at times. I know that that's clearly done in a purposeful and artful way, but in terms of unpacking it, I feel like I'm going to get a lot of it from this conversation, really, because the stuff that I could actually glean from the writing was so abstract that I feel like, yeah, this conversation is going to be most of my my discovery.
Jack, you look like you have something to say. Do you?
Yes, I certainly do. I really enjoyed it. It was lovely, and in a horrible way. Yes, it was a very enjoyable read for me. But I enjoy the disgusting, dirty side of the human psyche portrayed on any form of art. I also really enjoy non-linear. Well, it's not really exactly non-linear. It kind of is. I don't know. But I enjoy the non-traditional ways of telling a story, and quite like I like media that portrays dreamlike logic or nightmare-like logic, which is more apt for this discussion. Yeah, I really I relished the read. I loved the art style. The art style was so creepy, and so almost like infantile in how like rudimentary a lot of the characters looked.
Mm-hmm.
There's quite a lot of exaggerated features, and you know it's not meant to be. It's not like something that Alan Moore would do. Like think about Watchmen, how sort of everyone looks like they could be real in that form. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to the discussion, unpacking more. I have a few questions for Louis relating to what actually happens in it, because you're more experienced with it than I am. So
yeah, so this is my second time.
So my first impression is probably going to be a bit mired by. I only read it today, so it's going to be. I've not really had a massive amount of time to gestate it, but it might work to the advantage of the discussion. Might be a bit more fresh in my mind than you guys. So yeah, no, excited to talk about it. Really enjoyed it.
Cool, Liv. What do you think?
I think after I finished it and I let it sit for a bit and I sort of did my research, I got so much more out of the experience than I actually did reading it, because it's so bizarre and mental that I was constantly trying to work out what was going on. And I hate when you're reading something and you always feel like you're missing something. You feel like there's some private joke you're not in on.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that is the point of it, and that's what sort of makes it so good. You're not meant to try and work out what's going on. It reminded me a lot of Pulp Fiction in a way. It's just a series of scenes and impressions and weird situations, and it's best enjoyed just taking it as it is, and each scene in its own right. So yeah, when I was reading it, it was difficult. It was a bit of a slog because it's just the weird nature of it. But afterwards, I was like, yeah, it was doing some really interesting things there, which I think will be good to discuss later down the line.
Mm-hmm. I suddenly realised I didn't really give much of a synopsis. I don't know how much of a synopsis that you can give to something like this. The loose setup of this comic book is that our hero, Clay Loudermilk, goes to see a seedy BDSM film in a cinema, and he sees in this his ex-wife stars as the main dominatrix. Thus springs the quest to find his ex-wife. And the comic just kind of forgets that that's the plot every minute or so. And it just sets up new avenues. He bumps into someone else, they go here, they do this. Then he falls asleep, then he wakes up with new people around him. And then that happens pretty much till the very end.
I've got to admit, on my first read, I didn't even realise, or it wasn't until afterwards that I realised that was his ex-wife that he saw.
No, me neither.
That's news to me right now.
Yeah. I read about it and I was like, oh, that's what was going on.
I kind of just assumed he was some way like enamoured with this person and wanted to meet them in real life.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
That didn't clock for me at all.
Well, I think that's one of the things that is left pretty ambiguous about it, is because so many of the drawings of the women in this that you interact with are so similar to this actress.
Yeah.
I noticed that.
The mother of Tina is one of
we'll
them.
get to Tina.
Don't mention Tina.
I will see her forever in my nightmares.
The little girl who comes up with the plots for the film that is Clay Loudermilk's life is even somewhat alike to the ex-wife. Like a Velvet Glove Cast in Iron, it was originally published in 8 Ball magazine, one of Daniel Clowes' own sort of zines that he did. And Liv, you've read Ghost World, haven't you?
Yeah.
So I think I lent you my copy of that at some point.
Yeah.
And this is so different from Ghost World. I don't know how much you remember of that.
Yeah, I don't remember loads of it, but I remember it. There's a clear narrative in Ghost World, and it's sort of more. It's more of a classic comic, I guess. Maybe not in terms of themes,
bit more
but
accessible,
in terms
is
of like.
it?
Yeah, it's just like
Definitely.
a linear
It's just about
storyline.
It's about 2 girls in the summer between high school and college. That's all it's about, really. And just them sort of bumbling
I've seen
about.
the film of Ghost World, and it's fantastic.
It's funny you say that. I watched it the other night in preparation for this discussion.
Did you enjoy it?
So
we'll get to
that.
It's been a while since I've watched it.
Because I do have some things that I did find quite interesting about that film that tie into my thoughts on this. But it's interesting that the census seems to be you're sort of looking towards me for the answers, and I'll be honest, I don't have many more than you guys probably do. Which is kind of a meta thing on this story, because there's that whole plot about the value ape mascot,
Mr.
the
Jones,
face that Mr. Jones that appears throughout history, and there's a really great moment in that story where it kind of becomes clear that all the enthusiasts of this underground Mr. Jones society all kind of look to each other for more answers, but none of them have any more answers for each other, really. And that's kind of how we're all acting right now about the actual comic. It's so, like you said, Jack, it's so dreamlike. I think Daniel Clowes has even said as much, that it's inspired by daydreams that he's had, in the way that he'll get distracted and move from thing to thing in his mind. In a lot of sense, it's probably quite hard to talk about, but I think the moment, which is probably what's quite difficult about the first read of it, anyone does, but I think once you're ready to abandon any semblance of proper plot, I think it's a really fun ride.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that was my issue for when I was reading it. I was so, you sort of start reading something, you're trying to work out what's going on naturally, as you would anything you consume art-wise. And I just sort of held on to that throughout the entire duration of the comic, and I wish I could just... But I think it'll be better on rereading. I think it's something you need to read twice. That's probably why you may have a bit more,
I definitely got some very different thoughts on it this time round. I think I enjoyed it more the second time, for sure.
Yeah.
Because I knew that you're not really supposed to be here for the plot. You're supposed to be here for the atmosphere of it all, I suppose. And there is something so fun about having absolutely no idea where a story is taking you.
Yeah.
One of my complaints last time out about blue is the warmest color, is that I think I said that I knew what was about to happen in the film from about an hour off. Like I knew what was coming on the horizon. I had no idea what was going to happen from panel to panel or something like this. It's 2 difficult things to really contrast, but I do like the excitement of anything being on the cards in this kind of story, and he's not afraid to really let his creativity take you to wherever it is he wants to point a light in that direction for a bit.
I think it derives some great humour from those kind of moments as well. There was quite a few bits, just for the pure absurdity and randomness of them, that I found very funny. One of them being, we were talking about the Mr. Jones thing, the Mr. Jones being one of Hitler's birthmarks. That really got me.
I forgot that bit, didn't it? I forgot that it's just one panel where somebody offhandedly says oh, Hitler's living up in Brazil somewhere. You just see one panel of Hitler getting a haircut.
The way that the panel zooms into it as well is so funny. I got a lot of joy out of that one little bit.
Did you have a favourite plot or favourite part of it?
I liked the dog that you had to shave the back of to get the map.
Oh, Laura.
I love Laura. Laura was my favourite.
That was another one that was
Survived for 60 years on one syringe of water every day.
No orifices.
And that was something as well that, like, throughout the whole of the graphic novel, there were like little things that you think were just random aside jokes, but would then come up later. It's like when the dog first showed up, I was like, oh, okay, that's just one of those like random little bits. They're probably going to discard it, and it's not going to have much impact on. But then eventually, it comes back around, and it becomes this really integral part for the main character. I forgot his name, sorry.
Clay Loudermilk.
Clay, that's it. Yeah.
Whenever I hear Clay in my mind, I hear it in what I imagine Tina's voice to be. Clay, you're back.
That's another thing I loved about Tina was like the moments when he'd like go into her house and she'd suddenly turn into like a 50s American housewife, like desperately trying to entertain the guests and like erratically nervous.
Her infatuation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought the first part of the graphic novel that I clocked onto it wasn't going to be a normal read was it's kind of it's it's after he calls his mate to borrow his car, and he goes to his house and he's had his eyes surgically removed because they're infected. And he's got some like Asian like crustaceans in his eye sockets that are meant to clean out the bacteria, and that just like made me howl. I was like, "What?"
It's such a vivid drawing as well. It's
so
good.
It really it reminded me quite a lot in quite a few places of the Mighty Boosh, and in those absurd gags that they have that they never address the logic of, but there's so many of them, and you can almost see a weird sort of logic to it. Like with that gag in particular, I imagined it was poking fun at all the like alternative medicine remedies that you hear about and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like acupuncture and stuff like that. Like I don't know if that works or not, but it's a lot of that stuff can seem quite absurd, especially to like Western conventional medicine, and so that just seemed like that kind of thing taken to the nth degree, and I think there's quite a lot of stuff I think it's a deeply satirical work. Like it reminded me a lot of Under the Silver Lake. Like,
that's the only film or other piece of media I can think of that is like this.
Yeah.
Jamie and Liv, have you seen Under the Silver Lake?
I have not.
It's fantastic.
It's the follow-up film from the guy that did It Follows. And just, I was thinking, because as I was reading it this time, I was thinking, how would if I had to make a film or TV series of this, how would you go about it? It seems kind of impossible. So, which is why I watched Ghost World, because I wanted to see somebody trying to adapt one of his stories into a film.
Yeah.
And Under the Silver Lake is probably the closest thing to a comic like this being in a film, in the sense that the plot of that is really loosely set up, but so many different things and characters are framed on the most threadbare plot of Andrew Garfield becoming obsessed with his neighbour. It's more or less a carbon copy story, really.
Yeah,
like,
I was going to
Clay
say
is obsessed with the woman in this.
There's no way that I think it's David Robert Mitchell who directed Under the Silver Lake.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way he hasn't read this. I don't think.
Yeah,
because
I imagine
he's obviously a student of David Lynch as well. But that this is almost Lynchian in the graphic novel form, which I haven't ever seen done before, really, because we're so used to seeing I mean, if you like that kind of stuff, you are quite used to seeing films with unconventional logic and dreamlike logic, but I've never seen them in the written or the graphic novel form. So yeah, it was really interesting to see all these like different strands of like artistic DNA fall off it as I was reading it. I don't know if it's like just pure coincidence or anything, but I was getting heavy Twin Peaks vibes. Maybe that's just because they're both quite unconventional and dreamlike and strange and about small towns in America, in Middle America. But I think there's some deeper stuff going on, like philosophically, with both of them.
My favourite characters this time around were the two policemen that pick him up quite early on in the story. Who just talking police codes.
Just completely sick.
That really made me laugh.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I like that moment.
They were horrible.
Are kind of implied they're lovers.
Yeah.
And they go around marking people out in the deserts.
Yeah.
It's really weird.
It's very strange.
But there's loads of great like police brutality stuff brought up in that, I thought.
There was a heavy sense of anti-authoritarianism in it.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it completely eschews like any conventional narrative, so it's designed to be anti-authoritarian. But then you have all the stuff with like the gender wars and the sex cult, and eventually, I'm assuming you've read it if you're listening to this, but near the end, there's a scene where Bill Clinton gets taken hostage in the White House. And
the fact that there's a rendering of Bill Clinton in this as well, I find very, very funny.
Looks hilarious.
It's not too late. It's not too late, guys.
Yeah, that was great.
You can get off lightly if you let me go now.
Yeah, so it was. There's lots of sort of anarchistic sentiments to it.
Yeah.
But then I think it does a good job of portraying a chaotic world without order as well, and like lampooning that too. Sorry, Olivia, what were you going to say?
I was just agreeing with you. Like, there's so many subversive elements to it, which I think obviously when you first reading it was trying to grapple so much with the weirdness that it seems so normal, but like this main character Clay, he's such a vulnerable character as this like male protagonist. He's literally just manipulated and exploited by all these forces around him, and particularly authoritarian forces, but also like just like random conspiracists or like weird cults. And another element of that is Tina, who I think we're going to have to obviously have a big old discussion about Tina. She's such an interesting
kind of the
character.
linchpin of the entire story.
She kind of is. She's the most likable character.
She is. She's the most human and real, relatable character in the whole thing, but she's obviously this freaky tuna
potato child,
fish monster. Yeah. Well, did you pick up that thing that she maybe is or maybe isn't a direct descendant of Mr. Jones?
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
because the diver guy talks about Billings, his name is. He talks about when he was and he used to be an insurance diver. He'd been in the lake. And he's like, oh, I've seen shit, man. Like, that's where God is. And he keeps telling that weird Asian kid who's got, like, boss eyes. He's just constantly
drinking
eating
packets of ketchup. I hated him. I hated that character.
Just hearing about it's making me laugh.
He was the most irritating character, and I couldn't even hear the disgusting noises he was making. He just irritated me.
One of my favourite bits is when he discovers Billings crying at the grave of his dog, Laura. And he's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "It's like, I'm having a solo party here. Like, leave me alone." He's like, "Can I watch?"
Yeah.
Anyway, he says to the kid, like, that's where God comes from. And then within a few panels, you see the Mr. Jones figure turn into the beautiful man that impregnated Tina's mother. So she may be a young Jones.
At first, because I, it's the kind of thing that you try and work out in your head as you're reading it. Like, you're trying to guess where it's going to take you next. I thought that Billings looked quite similar to the portrait of the man. So I thought that it was going to be a case of Billings saw Mr. Jones in Tina's mum, and Tina's mum saw Mr. Jones in Billings and had gotten her pregnant, and then like it was going to be a more sort of rational explanation for these irrational things, like it was almost all a hallucination. But then it kind of I can't remember exactly what happens later, but I do remember that is undercut somewhat because well, as I say, I can't remember exactly what point it was, but yeah, I think that Tina is the descendant of what Billings calls Mr. Jones. Yeah, not sure what to make of who Mr. Jones is exactly. Maybe nothing.
Yeah,
like
maybe nothing. The guy who was supposed to be the head of the Mr. Joneses,
Mr. 1000.
Mr. 1000 says that like it's nothing. Like it's nice that you found me, but it's nothing. Like there's nothing at the end of this.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of commentary there about like the power that people put into symbols and how much you can believe in those things despite having nothing, which I think goes hand in hand with Liv, what you were saying about like the character not really having any control. I did notice that as well quite early on, that he was like completely had no autonomy whatsoever and was being dragged along.
He makes no choices for himself,
and I think that's true of a lot of other characters in this as well. I think there's quite a few surrounding characters who have just let things happen to them, and
he's a classic protagonist in the sense that he's just, you don't really know where he stands in any of the situations. He's just sort of trying to work out what's going on and find his feet. I guess he's sort of like the reader in that sense.
But, a blank slate to which you can project stuff onto.
I got such a sense of relief when they got to Mr. 1000, is that what he's called?
Yeah.
Yeah. When they got to his house and he was like, "Yeah, it's all just a big joke. Sorry, guys." I was actually like, honestly, thank God. Like, I don't know. I just couldn't deal with any more conspiracy.
That's the thing, because it's such an escalating story in that sense, isn't it? That it just, every new plot point cranks it up a gear in like a suspension of disbelief. But because you lose your suspension of disbelief so quickly in this story, it's really entertaining how it just keeps ratcheting up, like just like another slice of misery to pile on Clay. And that's just what every chapter is. It's just something horrible happening to him, preventing him from getting to where he wants to be.
Yeah, I suppose he is a stand-in for the reader, as Olivia said. Because we are.
That's a really good reading.
We are subject to all the shit that happens. Yeah, and the only decision that he makes in the entire thing is at the beginning, when he decides to go and look for his ex-wife.
Yeah.
Because it's even debatable whether or not he goes and watches the film of his own volition, I think.
The story just starts with him walking into the theatre, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But we don't, like, what is his motivation? Like, we don't, you know what I mean? Because he acts disgusted at being there. It's also one of the only times we get his inner monologue as well, is right at the beginning.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
'Cause it doesn't really come into play after that. We almost completely lose touch when he ends up at the sex cult, I think, is like the last time.
That's a great sentence.
And that's
There's a lot of male nudity in that cult.
Yeah. At first, I thought that he didn't have a penis, the cult leader. So when he like gets up and runs towards him, I thought he was like one of those. Like, I thought he had a vagina. I was like, that's fucking funny, weird. But to bring it back to like the the kind of protagonist that he is. It's like it is a convention in writing, and like it is taught in creative writing classes that your protagonist has to have can't be acted upon. They have to act in order to create conflict and keep readers engaged. And there were certain points where I was reading it and I was thinking, can't you just do something? Like, just take ownership of this weird situation. And he does a little bit by questioning, but he doesn't ever do any. He doesn't ever just up and leave and say, I'm getting away from these weirdos. But then I thought, when you're in a dream, you rarely have agency unless you're lucid dreaming.
That's true.
In which case, like, you're only in control of yourself. You're not in control of what happens to you. All you can do is experience it, you know. That's especially true for nightmares, because it is like the forces of your subconscious acting upon you. So yeah, I don't think it's really possible to read this story in any other way other than accepting the dream aspect to it.
Yeah.
It's strange that there's quite a few weird things to the reader that he dismisses, and then there's occasionally some strange things that they address, and they address as being strange. Like Tina as a character, they address as being strange, and the dog as well, they address as being strange. But there's so much else that goes on that's equally as bizarre that they don't kind of point a finger at and say, "Isn't this strange?"
No one ever acknowledges the existence of the film studio.
What, towards the end?
Well, ever. Like,
or the one across the street.
Well, everywhere that he goes to and asks about it, it's like,
oh
it's
yes, sorry, yeah,
moved.
I know what you mean now. Yeah,
like, do you know what I mean? And no one ever acknowledges.
Oh yes, yeah.
That the existence of the film.
Yeah,
interesting productions.
Yeah.
Does he get like transported to another world? I guess the dream world, but it seems like he's almost in a normal place, and then obviously he watches the film, and then he goes into the toilets. And it just, everything starts to go weird.
Yeah, it lost me there in terms of me like actually following the plot. I felt like I was vaguely following
like 2
it.
pages.
But when it got to that point, I was a bit lost.
When it gets to Hannibal Buress reading your fortune in a cubicle.
Yeah.
It goes off the deep end so quickly. It's brilliant for that.
Yeah.
There's some great graffiti in that panel as well that's brought into that's reincorporated later. Well, I think every part of the graffiti actually plays some part. Like, there's a swastika that obviously plays into the Hitler aspect. I can't remember what the other ones are, but they're like quite good gags. Oh, I always thought I was a man with no dick until I met a woman with no vagina or something. Just something weird that he obviously just thought was so funny.
The only aspect that still the main one that still confuses me is the meta story of what happened to the ex-wife. So in that she died in that Interesting Productions film and in real life. But then does Clay becomes part of the film, doesn't he, at the end?
Yeah.
When he's at the grave of his wife,
I believe so,
and the shirtless man rips him apart, and which is hilarious.
Jack Nicholson as the Terminator is how I.
He's just wearing jeans.
Yeah, he looks so uncomfortable.
He's so angry all the time.
That was horrible.
Gives that man a swirly.
Yeah, I'm just still a bit puzzled as to within that film, and that film is based on an actual song in our world, and the guy that is playing the song in the film looks exactly like Clay, but just like with a goatee.
Well, he goes to the Rock, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
After seeing it on a calendar, which I thought was extreme.
That's only just dawned on me that the Rock is called Calendra Rock, and he sees it on a calendar.
Yeah. So he goes there, and then he finds his wife's grave at the Rock, and then he gets his limbs ripped off by the angry man. His name's like Geesh or something, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Geet. Yeah. And and then his limbs get buried, and he's like a nugget.
Oh yeah, he doesn't actually die, does he?
No. So his
I
limbs
always
get
think he dies. But he doesn't.
no, he doesn't. His limbs get like left behind and buried by those mysterious people in the masks.
Mm. And Tina like starts nursing him.
Yeah, but before that, we like dolly out, and it's what's happening in the film, and then the film gets made, and then because the film gets made, and then it gets shown, and everyone loves it. That's a critically acclaimed snuff film, and then and then we go back to Tina's house, where Tina, the fish monster, is nursing our boy back to health, whilst he's like writing or painting with his mouth because he's got no limbs. So that's roughly what happens. I don't know what you can garner from that. I really, honestly, I'm accepting the fact that I'm not gonna understand it fully. Like maybe ever. The whole film aspect was kind of lost on me because I was so wrapped up with everything else, and I forgot about it completely when he sets out.
Yeah.
And it's only until he sees the little girl who's writing his life, I guess, who's writing the stuff across the room, who also smokes a pipe, which makes me think she's not a little girl.
The drawing of the pipe smoking girl is brilliant.
Yeah,
I love the design of her look.
She might just be a little person, maybe, or like a homunculi.
I think it's implied she's a little girl.
But she's smoking a pipe.
But Tina's a fish monster.
Yeah.
Like, where do you draw the line there?
I really don't think there's any pressure on the reader to sort of come to conclusions about the book, because with each, like, as each scene develops, there becomes a new elaborate dilemma that Clayton, he's not called Clayton, is he? He's called Clay. That he has to like explore.
Yeah, just Clay.
And yeah, by the end I was completely like, you could feel the escalation happening as towards the climax of the graphic novel, but it didn't come anywhere closer to making any sort of sense. And I think that's how it's best enjoyed.
Give me 6 of these beef jerkies. Hungry enough to chew the crotch out of a ragdoll.
Hey, you! How many times I tell you? No chef, no service. Get the hell out of my store. What do you think this is, Club Med?
It's America, dude. Learn the rules.
Learn the rules. You learn the rules. We Greeks invented democracy.
You also invented homos.
Fuck you.
You wish. You're by me dinner first.
Shall we have a deep dive on Tina then? Talk about her representation.
No pun intended.
In the because there may be some people listening who haven't read it, and she's definitely worth talking about on her own, I think.
Yeah.
So Tina's like she works in a diner that Clay first goes to when he arrives in the nameless town that he's in. She becomes infatuated with him, but basically I first thought she was a potato.
Yeah.
Because the first thing she asks is potato, like, do you want potato with your breakfast?
Yeah.
And I thought that I was like, oh, okay, this is just a weird character that's like a gag, a one-off. But actually, she gets some serious character development and becomes like the most human like refrain and like the only person who actually supports Clay throughout. And so she lives alone with her mum, who has a resemblance to Clay's ex-wife, like a massive resemblance. I'm not really sure what it's trying to say. I guess might be to do with the fact that he is still massively infatuated with his ex-wife, but also might be the fact to do that she's a horrible monster. Did you see the design of Tina's room?
I didn't notice.
It was so pathetic and like sad, like because it's.
But Tina kind of is.
Yeah, I know. It was great. Like it was some great like character development because she's got like a Kermit the Frog poster on at the back of a door that says,
"Oh my god."
and it says
I forgot about
smile,
that.
and like her room is like really like innocent. Susan was like a child, and she's
Aw.
obviously been like sheltered massively by her mum because she's a monster.
When she's working at the diner, and then some guy's like, "Oh, I don't want to stay in there anyways. Every time I look at her, I want to throw up my meal." And then the lady at the shop's like, "Oh, don't listen to him, Tina." Oh, literally,
Yeah.
I think I audibly was like, "Oh." She's such
But
a
then
like...
the first thing she replies to that is like, "What's going on in the soap?"
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's like her distraction. What's that soap called in Twin Peaks, Louis?
Invitation to Love.
Invitation to Love. I imagine that's because that's where I got some of the markers for the Twin Peaks like references, like the diner and the soap opera that are intermittently shown. And the heart wrenching bit where her mum is like, "Your father was so beautiful. What happened to you?"
Yeah.
It was horrible.
It's-
Yeah.
But
It's pretty tough. It's like it does have these moments where you think, where did it get this kind of emotional edge to it? Considering it puts no time into any of its characters, really.
Yeah.
It's not. I guess it kind of does, just very subtly, in a way that you don't really notice that you're taking in.
I think it does.
Yeah. It is quite
It tells it more through the world rather than through the characters.
It's quite an
Yeah.
achievement when you think about it, like how something can be so insanely weird, but it can still sort of connect to you on a deeper level.
I think that's to do with the art style very heavily.
I was
though.
going to say,
think-
could we talk about that for a bit? Because it's so interesting.
Yeah, we haven't really touched on that very much.
Yeah,
but
it's
I
like
think
one of the core aspects to it.
I think the crazy detail that goes into every panel of this really goes a long way to help fill in the blanks where the actual plot isn't doing anything, because like the plot is constantly moving at a bullet train's pace. And I guess I don't know about you, but I spent a long time just staring at the panels just because I wanted to take in every single corner of the panel, because there's always stuff to see in the backgrounds of these panels as well. And like you said, Jack, the design of Tina's room says a lot about Tina.
Yeah, I think that's why I'd benefit from a reread, because I'm not used to graphic novels or like consuming that sort of art. So I think you have a tendency to sort of gloss over bits if you're immersed in the dialogue or the storyline of a particular scene. So I would like to reread it to take in more of the art in that way.
Yeah.
One of the things that I really liked about the art style was the fact that even those characters who were drawn relatively normal had something that was a little bit off about them that made them creepy. Even like those, obviously the ones who were completely ridiculous, like we've talked about Tina and stuff like that before, but just some of the regular side characters, like the shopkeeper he met, I found really freaky. Just in his actions as well as the way that he was drawn was so unnerving and strange. And I think it helps a lot from like the black and white ink style as well. I think that makes the atmosphere of quite a lot of this quite dire and helps with quite a lot of the dark humour that's woven into here.
Yeah, there's that old radio host as well, whose obituary isn't transcribed, so you have to like read it in the really awfully written font that's in the graphic novel in order to get more information out of him. But he looks terrifying with his enormous forehead.
Oh yes, yeah. He's like the opening of one of the chapters, isn't he? There's like a huge half page of him.
Yeah. And he's got I don't know if I think it's where he's holding his business card and he says, "Have a nice day, asshole."
My favourite one-off character in that sense is when Clay is staying at that seedy motel in this room where anyone can just walk in whenever they want and just stay the night in that room as well. And it's a really massive room, and at the very end of the room, every time he looks up at the end of his bed, way in the corner, you can see this man in the window.
Oh my god, I
Always
forgot.
sort of like a little goblin fella staring over the window.
And he never
got a big laugh out of me every time, and it never goes into who that person is.
he never breaks eye contact either. It's like
it's always staring at Clay.
it's like that whole thing of like if you every time you make eye contact with a stranger, like it's instinctive to look away, and the people you need to be worried about are the people who don't break eye contact. One thing that I've just remembered is there's like a motif going on with it's first really brought out in the sex cult bit, which we might want to touch a bit more on because we haven't really talked about that much. But there's the beautiful son. She says, I can't remember what she says, but she says something like, "You taught me that everyone loves and hates each other at the same time," and that like paradoxical sort of aphorism kind of surmises the entire graphic novel for me, because I mean the title is was it A Velvet Hand? What's it called?
Like a velvet glove cast in iron.
Right, like a velvet glove cast in iron. So you've got like the soft with the hard, like the welcoming with the unwelcoming, and that's kind of what everyone is like. Every characters have elements of that. You know, it's like everything definitely. Everyone's like nice, and then they flip, and then they're mental.
Yeah.
And then, do you know what I mean?
He sort of gives an opportunity for every character that seems evil or fucked up to show some redemptive side, and to not cast judgment upon these horrible characters. Like the mum of Tina, who is like clearly a bit of a sexual predator and a bit of a dickhead to Tina all the time, is also really sensitive and obviously cares about Tina, but is repulsed by her and isn't afraid to express that to like whoever sees her. So I think all those characters sort of have that dual aspect to them.
It's really good getting to discuss these characters, because I didn't realise just how three-dimensional they are until now we're talking about them all.
Yeah.
Now, actually, Daniel Clowes has done such a good job in fleshing these people out.
I think it's definitely made me think a lot about how I'll form my own characters in writing in the future. Like, it's so important to not make characters just have this one side to them. They need to be multifaceted.
Yeah.
This time reading it, one of the main things that struck me was the sheer confidence of it. I was looking at Daniel Clowes' sort of his back catalogue, and this is like the first big thing he did was this. I think this was 1993, and I just think I could never write anything like this. Just writing this kind of world and just seeing it all in your head, and being able to not only write it but draw it for a reader or a consumer is just so impressive to me. It was one of the things that I've always found I've always been in awe of about graphic novels, is just this ability to really paint these worlds in such a different way. I guess what is one of the bonuses, like you said, Liv, that these characters can seem so fleshed out and three-dimensional because you see them in their environments, whereas if you're writing a short story or a novel, you don't really get the benefit of visual stimuli. You just go with what you can do with words.
Yeah.
And I think it's a testament to how good this is, that it tells so much through its images. It really uses its medium to tell its story.
Yeah.
Like you'd want from any piece of art, I suppose.
I'd love to see the notes that formed the sort of drafts and stuff for this, like all the pre-production for it. I'd love to see
usually
that.
when you buy a collected works like this, you get the sketches and the drafts in the back once you finished it. But unfortunately on this one, it's just the last page and then, that's it. You don't get anything else really, which is a shame. So like you say, I'd love to, often my favourite bits, like in a lot of the Batman graphic novels have got. You get to see a lot of how it started in its early development,
Watchmen
and it's really
too.
really interesting seeing how it all came together.
On a side note, when I was given Watchmen for my birthday a while back, that was at the very back page. There's a little note from Neil Gaiman to Alan Moore, and I might be getting that wrong because I can't remember, but it's something like that, and it looked so authentic that I thought I had a really rare copy, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is awesome!" And then I did some research, and
you rang up the auction house and said, "I've got it."
Yeah, I was bitterly disappointed.
One of the things I want to discuss, which we touched on earlier in this discussion, is that Jack, you said you've seen the Ghost World film.
Yes.
And I don't know about you, but whenever I read things these days, I try to picture, if I had to turn it into a film or a TV show, how I'd go about doing it. I've always been quite obsessed with that. I remember I went through a phase when I was like early teens, where I'd only read books of films, and then I'd watch the film afterwards to see how well it translated. And so I remember like reading The Beach, then watching it. That's not one of the good adaptations. But then something like Life of Pi, I think the film is as good as the novel, if not better.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, this is nearly unfilmable. I don't know how you could
Only David Lynch could
really
do it.
this. Maybe Lynch. Terry Gilliam, I think. I think Terry Gilliam could probably have a good stab at it. It got me thinking a lot of Fear and Loathing, like the acid scenes in that, when he's just seeing lizards at the bar and stuff. But that one night this week, I was scrolling through BFI Player, wondering what I should watch that evening, and I saw Ghost World. I was like, oh, that's the other Daniel Clowes comic. That's his most famous one. And I've been meaning to watch this film for a while. I'll watch that in preparation for this discussion. And I found that such a fascinating film. I didn't even think it was that good, the film. But I found it so fascinating to see how somebody had interpreted that to put it in a film. And because Daniel Clowes worked on the film, he co-wrote the screenplay for it. So I thought it's really interesting that this is how he wanted to do it. And I'd say the first half of that film is a really good, accurate depiction of what that graphic novel is like. But then the second half is a studio saying nothing's happening. She has to want to sleep with Steve Buscemi's character.
Is that not in the graphic novel?
No, he's like he's like a one-off character.
Really?
Yeah. They play that prank on him in the beginning, but that's all you ever see from him.
That's mental, because he's like the linchpin of the entire film. Like,
it's bizarre.
That love story is completely.
And it's one of the
that's
better. Well, it
disappointing.
is one of the cool things in the film is that I think for about the first half of that film, they justify making him a bigger character because it's played by Steve Buscemi, who's good. He's always good, and Thora Birch's chemistry with him is really good. But then you could just so clearly see like a hard line down the middle of that film where it's like, no, the characters in this can't be irreverent. They can't not want to do anything. They have to she has to dream of going to university. Like she has to dream of going to art school, and she has to want to have sex with men and stuff. It's like, that is so not what the comic was about. It's really bizarre. That's
hilarious, because Ghost World seems like a schmaltzy coming of age film with an art house aesthetic. That's so when the graphic novel's been like harped on about so much, I've been like a bit dismissive, which I guess is a really not a good attitude to have. But not because I didn't enjoy the film, because I did enjoy the film when I saw it, but I didn't think it was like worth the hype, So
they also, Scarlett Johansson's character is a co-main character with Thora Birch in the graphic novel. It's about those two.
She does get sidelined in the
film. But in the film, she just gets dropped about halfway through it. And she's just like, I want to buy an apartment, which is like, they don't care about that stuff in Ghost World. They just It's a bit like this, but just a way more accessible version of this. The graphic novel of that, in that it's a lot more set in the real world, but it's just a series of vignettes of what these girls get up to that summer and what stupid crap they want to do.
I'm definitely gonna have to read it, I think, because
I highly recommend it.
yeah, I really enjoyed this one. So
But it got me thinking about like how could you possibly turn this into? Not that I think you have to, but it's an exercise I always like doing in my brain. How could you film it?
yeah, as we've said, I think it would just be. I think Under the Silver Lake has come as close as you really can.
On a slightly different topic, going back to we were talking about the sex cult that he comes across quite early on in the film. I was getting graphic novel. My bad. Because we were just talking about that film.
One more mistake, Jamie.
Podcast,
You're out.
You're on thin ice, Jamie.
I was getting, in a combination of that and also when we were saying about the characters having like a lack of autonomy, it reminded me of loads of like the Manson cult and how quite a lot of that was about him making other people doing his bidding and manipulating their sense of free will. And I wasn't sure sort of when we first started the graphic novel how long like that section was going to go on for, and I thought like the whole thing was kind of going to be an analogy for that, but obviously it gets completely thrown off. But I think that there were a few things like that are clearly rooted in some kind of like real events or commenting on some kind of movement. Like, you know, we were saying with Bill Clinton being in it and there being a few references to real life songs, you know, as dreamlike and as strange and abstract as it is at times, there's also points clearly where it's trying to touch on something that we're all familiar with.
It's funny you say that, Jamie, because I don't know if anyone noticed that I think when he first gets involved in the cult, they're singing that song that is also used in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood when you first see the Manson family. The all is one, all is one, one is two.
Maybe I was
That's interesting.
Then.
Yeah, they're definitely leading you down that path.
Yeah.
Is it by the Manson family band?
I actually meant to look up where that song comes from, whether it's like a folk song or recorded. I don't know what it was. Yeah,
because I know they released an album.
Yeah, I'd rather blindly speculate and call it the truth.
yes, so would I. But actually, interesting that you come back to the sex cult, Jamie, because I know we talked about him not having agency.
Please come back to the sex cult, Jamie.
But that is another time, one of the few times where he shows agency, which is where they're about to commit the murder, and he goes into the van, and then beautiful son is like, "What are you doing?" And then she berates him, and then she like leaves and goes back into the house. And at that point, I was like, "Get away from this place, Jesus Christ!" So
I love the look of that weird van thing that he steals as well. Yeah, it's really funnily shaped. It's like the car from from Mystery Men. You remember that film?
I don't really remember that film. No.
But even at that stage, it's not like he's proactively fighting his way out. She kind of just leaves, and he sees his opportunity and takes it. There's no point where he actually puts up any kind of fight or pushes against the cult. He just gets lucky, kind of.
He doesn't resist, does he?
That was another sense of relief in the book where he manages to get away from the cult. I was just like, oh my god, I really hope that's like the end of it, and he just has nothing more to do with that. That's the thing, you feel so at mercy to the surroundings as a reader, and when something works out the way you wanted it, you're just like, breathe out and
it's like it's one of the most effective like almost horror-esque things to do is like to portray like not something necessarily supernatural or anything like that. It's just portraying someone's life not being in their own control. I just find it very, very anxiety inducing, and for a lot of the graphic novel, that's what I was getting, and like that's how I would describe my experience of reading it. It's just like pure anxiety inducing because it's just horrible, like not being in control and not understanding anything that's going on and not having any single way out, and just being surrounded by all these horrible people who want to use you to their own ends, and then like not have absolutely no regard for who you are as an individual. like it's terrifying. It is absolutely
Yeah.
terrifying.
And that reliance almost comes, thinking about it now, comes full circle by the end of it when Clay ends up completely incapacitated and at the will of others.
That's why Tina and the dog Laura are, we're drawn to them most as readers, because they're also like these such innocent characters. Like obviously Laura is just this completely stupid dog that has just been brought into this weird world by some scientist dude, and Tina is just this like sort of socially exiled character who looks like a freak from the outside but is actually quite nice and somewhat normal. Because they sort of are the parallels in this like bizarre world of weirdos.
Before we move on to everyone's favourite part, the scoring system, which no one has any issues with whatsoever, if you could be any character from Like a Velvet Glove, Cast and Iron, who would you want to be?
That's a great question.
Jamie.
Great question. And I'm going to answer... Is the name of the dog Laura?
Yeah.
I'd like to be Laura.
Didn't she end up dead?
And shaved.
In this world, that's a preferable fate, I think, to actually living in it.
Well, it's not necessarily the character that I'd like to be, but the character that I like the most. If you can even call it a character, like I just love the image of it.
Liv, who would you like to be?
Is it Mr. 1000? Sorry, that is what he's called, isn't it? I keep forgetting his name.
The guy who manages to breed dogs with no orifices.
Yeah, he's just like sort of living in the outside with his weird wife and just chilling, and every now and then he gets a visit from like some conspiracist, and then he's like, oh, it was all a big joke, and it's just pretty chill existence there. So yeah, I guess him or his wife. Sort of on the outside looking in.
Jack, who'd you like to be?
Mr. Jones, obviously.
That panel of Mr. Jones striding enormously through the desert is so good.
I love his...
the guy who claims that he saw him one night. He's just like a giant moving over the desert.
I thought his design was the funniest thing in the world. And like how he has two forms. He has this like Dr. Manhattan form where he's like a Promethean, like the apex of humanity. And then he just like looks like the Monopoly man. Like mid abortion.
And if it were down to me, I'd like to be the guy that owns the motel, who's always in the sailor's cap.
Not the captain.
Yeah, the captain.
To bring anything for the captain, did you?
Got anything for me?
Filthy landlubber.
The little girl smoking a pipe wouldn't be a bad.
She's also pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, or Dr. Wilde, actually.
Should we do some scores?
Yeah.
Go on then. Oh, I really can't give it a score.
I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. I probably upped it from my last read as well, just because this time I really appreciate the artwork a lot more this time, just because I was a little less preoccupied with having to get to grips with the plot, because there is none.
The artwork's great.
It's wonderful. It really is. He's a fantastic artist.
Yeah, the artwork's amazing.
I'll give it an 8 because I'd like to have the opportunity to sit with it a bit more and like try and figure it out a bit more before I go any higher, even though it is already really high because I really enjoyed it. So yeah, 8 out of 10 I suppose is probably the most appropriate score I can give it.
I really don't want to give it a score because I don't feel like it's something that can be fit into it's just so unconventional in every sense. I feel like giving it a score sort of defeats what it's trying to do. But
we have our first all that was quite useless veto on the score right there.
Yeah, I'm going to veto it. I don't want to give it a score. I liked it, I enjoyed it, and I feel like it's got a lot going on, and I want to read it again and see what else I can draw from it.
I think I respect it quite a lot, and I love the art style, and I like a lot of the dark humour in it. But I do think the lack of the plot and the way that it's quite schizophrenic at times makes it, particularly on your first read, very confusing. And as it piles on, especially towards the end, it gets probably the worst for that. I was so confused during the last few pages.
Yeah.
But I think it's something that it's going to benefit more from rereads and sitting with and thinking about. So I think for that reason, on first impressions, I'll go a little bit lower and say 6.
Ooh,
Cancelled.
that is a low boy.
Just a little bit though. I liked most of it.
It's positive.
Oh, well, yeah, I completely agree with everything you did just say.
Yeah, I feel like while I was reading it, I was actually not enjoying it, and I was like, well, I've literally got nothing to say about this. This is not good. And then afterwards, I was like, I can totally see what he was trying to do. It all makes sense, kind of.
So I'll preface this by saying we've kind of it's been a running joke, and we've made allusions to looking at a Doctor Who episode before. And whilst it hasn't quite come to that, I picked something in the parameters. So this is a one-off BBC.
Is it the Sarah Jane Adventures?
It's not, no.
Is it Doctor Who Confidential?
It's actually... I've actually picked an episode of Class.
What?
I'm
Oh,
joking.
What's
That's
Class?
not. I've
I
not
don't even know
picked.
what that
I've not.
is.
I've not picked an episode of Class. It's
Okay.
another Doctor Who knockoff. I've actually picked a one-off biographic that they aired in 2013 called An Adventure in Space and Time.
Okay.
okay.
Sounds
It's about-
interesting.
It's about the start of the show, essentially. So it revolves around. Got David Bradley in it, who plays the first Doctor, William Hartnell, and it also focuses on quite a lot of producers and BBC execs, namely Verity Lambert and Sidney Newman. And it's mainly about how the show started and the first cycle. So it pretty much goes from the beginning of the show to the end of William Hartnell's run as the first Doctor.
Sick.
Oh, that sounds
Boy.
very
Oh,
interesting.
I'm very intrigued by that.
Yeah, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it aired in 2013 as part of the 50th anniversary stuff. So I think it was a few days. I remember watching it on TV a few days before the actual 50th episode. But I think it's quite overlooked. So I'll be interested to see what you guys think about it.
Cool.
Cool.
Cool. Cool. Cool. Cool. Cool. Cool. Cool. Cool. Well, there we have it. End of another podcast. That one was on Daniel Clowes, Like a Velvet Glove Cast and Iron, so thanks for joining us for that one. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you read it. It is quite wonderful. Definitely gets the cogs going in your head. Jamie has picked An Adventure in Space and Time, the 2013 TV movie about the inception of Doctor Who, and there will be a link in the description of this podcast as to where you can find that to view before the next one. Thanks again to Jack, Jamie and Liv, and you, listener, for sticking with it. Toodle pip.